So I just want to start with one piece because we've been talking about this a lot. This is a father filed a civil suit along with family members. They received a $10 million judgment. There's some evidence that came out after that trial that may or may not be introduced in this criminal case. Of course, the criminal case has a much higher standard of proof. In the civil case, the evidence that came out was a fingerprint on a gun case where the defense now shows that the defendant had been handling that gun case. So let me ask you from your standpoint as a forensic investigator, what have you seen or do you want to see in order to shore up this family's belief that the son that's on trial actually committed this murder?
I think the most compelling piece to this is going to be this testimony we're actually hearing right now, coupled with the postmortem interval relative to the body. The big issue here, Bob, has been time. Time is the benchmark for all of this relative to how long had she been deceased and how long was someone absent from the body, because there's conflicting stories here. So as we piece together this timeline, which is, I have to admit, this is painful to watch. You were referring to Greek tragedy. You can see the sadness in this poor man's eyes as he's testifying here in front of his child. It is going to be essential that they get this thing down to every jot and tittle. I'm going to be very interested to see how the defense treats this gentleman.
So, well, obviously, as a cross-examiner, you treat this gentleman, I would say, as a defense lawyer, kind of carefully because he comes off really well for the jury. But when you say timeline, what's best for the prosecution here?
Well, I think that what's going to be best is to marry up within certain parameters how long the deceased had been down. And that is, those things that we look at like rigor mortis, everybody's heard of, and livor mortis and algor mortis, and all these temperature, body stiffness, settling of blood, postmortem lividity. And why this is going to be key and where there could be a significant problem is that if in this rural location they did not have a representative to come out from the medical legal community and actually conduct these measurements in situ. Always remember this: it doesn't matter how much you do at the morgue relative to the body. When it comes to PMI, it is essential that you get everything done at the scene, because that is in situ. That's the pristine condition of the body. That's the point in question.
Joesph, I want to ask you about a couple things that I noted here. To your point of timeline, kissed her on the forehead and she was cold. This isn't so much forensic. They only spent one night apart. Obviously, that's important. Her feet were by the air vent. And I know you talked to me also about, this issue of talking about crossed arms and her crossed legs. What does this mean to you forensically?
Well, what it means to me, Bob, is that there is a perception that the general public has when they see a dead body. There's a way a dead body is supposed to look. And anytime over the course of my career in New Orleans and Atlanta that I saw a body whose hands had been crossed and the feet had been crossed, many times I would think the first thing that would come to my mind as an investigator is there's a possibility this may have been staged.
Right.
Because this is an atypical position. Folks at home will just think about maybe they've had a loved one that has unfortunately passed away. They visited the funeral home. Many times you'll see the arms crossed like this. People do not die that way. And he made that statement from the stand. Now, to this point about kissing her forehead, and I think that there is forensic value here in the sense that they ask him about had they ever spent a night apart. What they're trying to do is, and you know this, but they're trying to establish the fact that he had real familiarity with her. She wasn't normally, I guess by his measure, a cold person. But when he touched his lips to her forehead, she was cool to the touch, okay? But the problem lies herein. If there was not a core body temperature taken at that scene at the time of processing, that is going to be problematic. It doesn't matter how cold your body is in the periphery. What matters is how cool or how warm it is relative to time, relative to your core. That's generally done at the liver.
Yeah, and in a case of this nature, Joesph, this is going to be really, really key information, and we can only anticipate, as we've covered so many cases on the Law and Crime Network, was this done the right way or not? Because that could be the case cracker for the prosecution or not. I know that you, Joesph, thought that this guy is extremely methodical, very purposeful, and he's killing them with this testimony. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, very well laid out, thoughtful. He's almost got, if I dare say, he's almost got a therapeutic tone to him as he's talking to this guy. He's being very gentle with him. And I think that when defense they're going to have a hard mountain to climb here because, as you mentioned earlier, they don't want to bruise this guy very much up on the stand because that's not going to come off well with the jury. This guy's very, very well ordered. You can tell he's put a lot of planning into what he's asking here.
Yeah, the questions and answers are killer. He's a very sympathetic witness. It makes it very difficult for the defense to know how to approach a witness like this. I think this was an amazing witness for the three things as a prosecutor I want. Credible, sympathetic witness that comes off as being believable and truthful. But how do you judge that? Well, the things that I want you to talk about are where he keeps talking, the prosecutor, about the cold forehead or the cool forehead, but that she wasn't stiff. And I want you to get me into rigor and all those other processes there. But I have to say one thing at the end was even more killer to me that I got to give this prosecutor credit. He talked about how that the father, the guy who just got testifying, was upset that he wanted the investigation to go quicker, and he was upset they didn't take the clothes of both him and his son who's on trial for murder. These are not the actions of a guilty person who's asking the police to get evidence as opposed to being happy they didn't get it. Thoughts?
Oh, yeah, it's very powerful, and that he's saying this from the stand, that he wanted them to be proactive. He has at least some minimal understanding of, the way we work in the field. He understands this clothing is going to be crucial and it's important. He wants to find out who the killer of his wife is. Right. And everything else be damned, I think, at this point. That was very, very powerful. It really sent a shock through me when I heard it because, this extends out to, that damnable topic everybody talks about, right. CSI effect, where the public now has an understanding of what minimal standards are. Hey, shouldn't you take my clothes? Shouldn't you look at me? Shouldn't you examine my body? Right. Start here. Start here.
So let me bring in Joesph Scott Morgan. I appreciate you're still here with us, the forensic death investigator. And I want to ask you this, from your perspective as forensics based, if there's a conviction against an individual that even if an appeal hasn't been done, the conviction still stands, should that go away from your perspective if the defendant or the convicted felon dies?
No, I don't think that it should. I don't think that's not something that should happen. Of course, we have examples, I think, that run kind of parallel to this. We begin to think about someone making an admission in the idea that they're going to die, and that thing is only valid, in fact, if they do die. So I don't know. I think that it really opens the door up for civil litigation. Linda had mentioned the future of his daughter, because there are people that are going to come after the estate in this particular case, and they've let this thing stand, and now, the dead can't defend themselves at this point. You can say whatever you want to about them.
Right, absolutely. And I do think, though, in a civil case, they can at least argue he's no longer alive. And so because of that, it affects the civil suit or the civil suit proceeding or not. It's a really fascinating issue that's been, I think, and tell me what you think. I have such great respect for you as an expert. And we talk about on other shows we do together about the fact that, sometimes if you're a public figure, whether you're famous because you're an athlete, because you have a lot of money, because you're an actor, whatever it is, sometimes that puts it in a different light. So do you think that we're only hearing about this because he was a football player?
Well, I don't know. That's a curious question, Ashley. I have to say, in my view, when I first heard this, I heard about the news yesterday. It actually broke while I was on with Law and Crime, and I was thinking, wow, this is like a precedent-setting moment. I'm obviously not a legal scholar, but now that you've mentioned there are other states taking notice of this, it'll be interesting to see if the U.S. Supreme Court takes this up. moving down the road. So yeah, I think the fact that he's involved in it does in fact raise the profile of it.
Joesph Scott Morgan, you are a professor and you teach students all day long. Talk to me about the daughter's behavior and posts. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, not only is this guy whose yacht she was on is associated with the USC, he's on the board of trustees, and they were in the Bahamas, from what I understand. And that's when her mom was arrested while this child was spring breaking it out there. Look, there's so many layers to this thing. And when it comes down to what they're describing is essentially a shakedown of the system. One of the most troubling things for me in academia is the fact that they had somebody coming in to allegedly fraudulently taking ACT and SAT scores for these little angels to get the scores up, and to make matters worse, they had been advised to claim, at least a certain group had been advised to claim that their children had learning disabilities, so that they would get extra time on these tests. I work with students all the time that work full-time jobs and still take full-time classes, and they are struggling hand to mouth to make it. It absolutely enrages me. My professor comes out in this because I see how hard it is for kids many times in college that just want to make themselves better. And they've had every advantage in the world. It's really disgusting.
And I'm so glad you're on with me, because here's the other question I have, and you'll have a better perspective of it. I think this is the tip of the iceberg. I think there's more people involved. I think that's going to come out. What are your thoughts? Do you think this is, it's just 50 people, or is this a bigger issue than we realize?
I don't know. They're throwing numbers out like $25 million involved in this, and it's just not limited to USC. We've had the names of University of Texas thrown around, Yale, Harvard, Stanford prominently. I think one of the coaches up there has been forced to quit as a result of this. This kind of and listen. The coaches that are involved in this, they try to separate the athletic department from the university. These coaches are the university. College sports are an outreach program so that universities can turn the spotlight on what they're doing. It gets the name out there. So don't try to parse this in any way. The coaches that are involved in this, we talked about the rowing and all that sort of thing. They're just as much a part of the university as a professor is. Okay, so they need to be held to the same standard.
Absolutely. So my husband played football at college years ago, but when he played, absolutely, that's true. They're the one and the same. They represent the university, whether you're a professor, whether you're an intern, whether you're a coach. So couldn't agree with you more.